Welcome back to Etch Money, folks. I'm your host, Etch Towers, and we're talking spending differently and learning about organizations on their own digital journey, leveraging SAP solutions. Guys, can you believe we're on episode 2? Time does fly, and for this episode, I'm going to call it Proof is in the Pudding, or maybe Drink Your Own Kool-Aid, because it's not only appropriate to talk and share customer stories, but even more important to share our own story. Yes, if in case you were wondering, SAP uses SAP. That's right. With well over 100,000 employees and approximately $5 billion in annual spend, to run our own best is just as important to make sure that all 100,000 employees procure goods and services from the right suppliers at the right price, leveraging guided buying. Our guest today is actually the CPO of SAP, Nikolaus Kirner. Nikolaus lives in Germany, so I was excited to, number one, find the right time to talk to him, but two, I realized we got a lot of things in common, and I just say one of them involves beverages made in Germany, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. He has an impressive career with roles across Europe, Great Britain, and also is a top 30 member of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply Chain Procurement Power List. A man with a plan. Nikolaus, welcome to the show. Nick, Happy New Year, and thanks for joining us today on Etch Money. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastically well. Happy New Year to you as well. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you on the show. Nick and I actually had a moment to chat, and I realized we have a lot in common. And one of them is actually skiing. I love to ski, and you mentioned that your family loves to ski as well. But another tidbit that most may not know is that your family is in the brewing business. And I quite frankly, I like beer. So that's really piqued my interest. But what's interesting is that it prompted you to do something just a little bit different with your career. Talk to us about that.
That is actually true. Yes, I was growing up in a family business and a small brewery in the south of Germany, close to the Swiss border. And it was probably at that time a bit too local for me, because the next big city was Zurich, pretty much an hour's drive. And I always wanted to go out into the big wide world. So I studied business, and I was always getting some experience in Asia at that time. So I was applying for 40 different companies, German companies in Asia, for their subsidiaries, for doing an internship. And guess what? Where I ended up at Robert Bosch, which is the big car supplier, tier 1 supplier. And I ended up there in the procurement department. And that's how I initially came into the world of procurement, because later on, when I finished university, I applied at Lufthansa, and then my future boss asked me and said, "You have done procurement. Don't you want to join me in the procurement department?" And that's how I ended up there somehow.
Well, you know, kids nowadays, they have tough decisions, right? Going into the brewing business or procurement, you know, very, very challenging decisions to make. You know, you lived quite a few places and worked in a variety of industries as a CPO for a global tech company like SAP. And are you seeing challenges in procurement and supply chain? Are they all the same across industries, or do you really see some unique differences?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think there are some, of course, some commonalities which we all have in common across industries. Always the typical, or that people call it the fight for having the seat on the table, of influencing, is procurement represented on the board? Always the discussion. Most of the time they're a bit undervalued and rather seen as a back office function. I think these challenges probably most of the industries have together. The fight, or the war for talents to attract the best people for the function. I think that's definitely a commonality. Most of the time we are short on budgets, both for spend, for systems investments, but also for headcounts. I think there are some commonalities, but what are differences? I think I've done a few industries. My last job was in definitely a low margin industry where cost and cash was everything. So of course, yeah, you can influence quite a lot, but it was mainly focused on cost out and cash. I worked in retail where everything was about merchandise, assortments, getting the right products in place, but of course fighting hard for each penny or pence on the pricing side. And probably now in SAP, it's rather about speed. It's about customer satisfaction and it's about developing the right supplier partnerships for co-innovation, for co-developments, etc., which is definitely an interesting topic. So there are some differences across industries, but all in all, it's quite a fantastic function to work for. Huh?
I would absolutely agree. And you talk about low margin business and retail. I've had similar experiences with, even buying power, right? Working for large conglomerates where buying power was much more substantial compared to when I worked for smaller niche companies. So I totally understand the differences. Last I checked, I believe SAP has about $5 billion in annual spend. May have shifted a little bit with COVID. And, we're always talking to customers about managing all types of spend, indirect, direct services. Can you talk about, what SAP's spend profile is and maybe give our listeners an indication of volumes, any trends you can share about our spending patterns?
No, that's happy to do so. It's actually a bit more than 5.5 billion. In dollars, we're talking about roughly 6.7 billion nowadays, with the euro at 120. I think the biggest, and I've named the biggest categories. The biggest one is actually what we call the professional service side, which is all of the billable and non-billable consulting services on application development, applications, infrastructure services, that kind of stuff. That is by far the biggest one, then followed by the whole infrastructure. As you're aware of, SAP is running more than, at the moment, 120 different data centers. But of course, we're more and more shifting towards the cloud and having strong partnerships with what we call the hyperscaler, the AWS, the Microsoft Azures, the Googles of this world. That is a big spend. Then we have a huge spend, what we call the workplace infrastructure, which is everything around your workplace, from a software, from hardware, your computers, laptops, etc., to buildings, rents, lease, facilities management, which is all in all sums up more than 1.4 billion as well. Marketing, still a good three-digit sum, of course, in COVID times declining a bit, where we had a huge shift from offline events towards more online events last year. Travel, pretty much after Q2 coming to a complete stop, but initially in the good old times, nearly $1 billion spent, which we're spending on travel across the globe. And then we were still using, especially in Germany, having a big car fleet, which we have actually one of the biggest car fleets in Germany. That is a big thing. So quite a huge variety of topics, of categories, and quite a few challenges as well on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and you talk about the good old times when we talk about travel expenditures, and I just got my United Club card in the mail, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to use it, so maybe those good old times will come back. So here in America, we have a few sayings, some of them, from very nuanced situations, but things like, drink your own Kool-Aid, or practice what you preach, or proof is in the pudding. In essence, SAP is in the business of selling procurement and supply chain software solutions for global companies, some even larger than us. And what better story to tell than, yes, SAP actually uses their own solutions like guided buying, spot buy, Concur, etc. Can you talk to our listeners about, the landscape here at SAP and how we've actually adopted our own solutions and been pretty successful doing it?
No, happy to do so. And in SAP, we said SAP runs SAP. As simple as that, of course, yes, we need to lead by examples, and so we did that in a consequent manner. We started our journey to move towards the cloud in 2015, when we rolled out Ariba across the globe. One system, one process, no exceptions, which was quite a successful rollout. Followed then in 2017 when we rolled out field class across the globe for all of the temp workforce, etc. And then, of course, our latest acquisition there in 2019, we rolled out procure for the whole travel, for the booking as well as for the expenses. So nowadays, we can say that we cover pretty much, we have 100% compliance So yes, SAP runs SAP that you have to show compliance, and which is good and makes my life on the Maverick buying side relatively easy because we have quite a huge discipline there. It all comes back into the backend at the S4HANA or at the bank. So I have one single backend system which makes my life easier as well on the whole data quality on the analytics side, which is compared to my former employers fantastically well because you're going to have all the data in one place. And from that perspective, I'm really enjoying that and really help further developing our tools together with our product side, wherever we can have some ideas, etc., doing some co-developments.
I mean, single source of truth. I mean, I think any CPO or category management team would love to hear that, and 100% compliance. I mean, just a fantastic metric that I think a lot of companies would love to get to. And what about your team specifically? They're acting, as global category managers for SAP. Are they leveraging any of these capabilities as well in their day-to-day activities?
Yeah, they do. I think we are organized like that, but we have pretty much 5 global categories, and then below that various subcategory leads, which is I think a total number of 23, who are doing the category strategy and leveraging and managing all of the key suppliers. And then we have the so-called sourcing excellence champion, which is rather the technical sourcing. They are organized on a regional base in the US, in South America, in Europe, Asia, Pacific, etc. And they're doing more the technical sourcing and executing the strategy. And then, of course, part of it also, we further and further automate that. The whole operational stuff is done in our shared service, in our 3 shared service centers, which then is not part of the procurement organization anymore. But we can focus on the technical and, of course, more and more on the strategic side of things, of building really true, strong partnerships. And I think that is the direction we are going in.
Makes sense. It also seems obvious that, a lot of industries that are suffering financially because of COVID and, what's happening in the world today, it's probably changed a lot of their spending patterns. As a CPO yourself, have you seen SAP spending patterns shift, and has your team been able to react to that, leveraging Ariba?
Oh yes, we did. It was a challenging year as well. Also, having said that, we've seen other industry who were suffering much more on COVID. But now we had our challenges. In the beginning, it was all about the typical operational challenges. Many other procurement departments was facing simple things like acquiring thousands of masks for our staff in the office in Shanghai started. When was that? In early Jan, who all of a sudden were challenged with these kind of things, keeping the offices up and then doing all the prevention measures, etc. there. Then, of course, we have to do our cost out measures as well, challenging demands accordingly, but then more and more driving also cost out measures, etc. But if I look at the categories, probably, despite the windfall was, of course, our travel declined completely. So I said the spend pretty much went down to 0. But in other categories, of course, we had to drive costs further down. Typical example also, which kept us quite busy, was the whole marketing events. SAP is running for their customers a lot of offline events. In Vegas, for example, the biggest fair there, the Sapphire, but also some regional events. And of course, all of a sudden, these events needed to be cancelled, to be renegotiated and transferred into digital events. And all of a sudden, we need to become the master and world champion of the best solution on the digital platforms, etc. So there was quite a lot of agility necessary over the last months. And I think we are now more in a more stable one. But that means on the other side, yes, one or the other topics we have done in the past on the marketing side, we don't do that again anymore like that, but we adopted towards the new normal, as simple as that.
Yeah, the new normal. And I'm sure the new normal has changed, kind of your approach in the industry. For those that don't know, Nick is part of the top 30 most influential procurement power list. And, you've written a lot of blogs, you speak at, industry events and probably now virtual. But when you're engaged with industry professionals, what topics are resonating with the minds of CPOs, procurement teams, et cetera? What are the common, conversations you're seeing folks want to have, at these particular events?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question. Of course, first of all, everyone has its own war stories at the end of the road about great negotiation, great tenders, great supplier engagement, etc. That's a typical side. But I think more important is the common challenges about the war for talents, technology, which the right technology to apply, and of course I have the right solutions for that one nowadays. But also, and I think that is a common theme about how better to sell the value proposition of procurement, because this is where still procurement departments, CPOs struggling, really selling their own services, their own values they deliver towards the C-suite. And given that I've run a few procurement transformations throughout my last years, I think I have a few things to say, how to influence a CEO, a CFO, how to sell it in simple words. Once in a while, CPOs and procurement people are a bit too much in their own lingo instead of really doing the sales bit and the elevator pitch you normally need to do. And these are probably more the common topics in these kind of forums. But of course, also, what's the future of procurement overall? I think that is an interesting one, and how the function overall evolves.
Absolutely. When you talk about the power of influence and, being a trusted advisor and having that relationship with the C-level is something that I've also heard in the industry, talking to a lot of executives and professionals about building the brand of procurement. So that totally makes sense. I know that with procurement with purpose, this is a big initiative here at SAP. And quite frankly, I'm really excited to learn about SAP's stance to support, spending more with social enterprises and diverse suppliers. Talk about, what that means and how you're involved to shape our messaging in the market, and also how we change our own buying behaviors.
No, that's an absolutely great topic you outlined there. And we outlined a new corporate initiative called 5+5 by 25, which pretty much has the target of setting, based on the addressable spend, that by 2025 we want to address 5% of our global spend towards social enterprises, and 5% towards businesses with an inclusive background, and address that because of money we spend anyway, but then giving those money spent a dedicated purpose. And this is where we currently are. We are rolling it out. We did last year a pilot in the UK, which relatively easy on the addressable categories. I mean, you won't get a data center provider run by a social enterprise. That's not happened. But in the right categories, we managed to push up the volume within a few months up to 2.5%. So we were running the pilot in the UK. We're now in the phase of rolling it out on a global base. So you have to define the proper reporting. How do you get the data right? But even more important, where do you find the right social and inclusive suppliers out there in the market? There are some markets which are more mature, like the US, like Australia, but some markets, like our home market here in Germany, which is less immature, where we're really helping to found some associations to gather all of the social companies, etc., and really bring more of these companies towards our supplier list. And then, of course, we're currently setting up some sort of an onboarding ambassador program. That part of my team is really bringing these kind of companies into the SAP world, giving them a fair chance to bid on the RFP and to really making their stand across the RFPs. And that is a work in progress, but I'm quite confident you will hear quite a few more success stories out of that one over the upcoming months. And the next phase is also to encourage our corporate partners, both on supplier side as well as customers, to probably doing a similar mindset change within their procurement departments and really running their own procurement with purpose programs. So I'm spending a bit of time on that one to really embrace the program overall.
It's obviously a great goal and great leadership from SAP for taking on the stance. We've had a lot of discussion in the U.S., as you can imagine, about social inclusion and supporting minority and diverse businesses. So I'm really proud and excited to hear that SAP is taking this seriously and really, leading, being a market leader in this space. So it's great to see that this is actually taking off in the UK, and looking forward to hearing more about how SAP is going to help with that globally. We also have tons of innovation happening as well, in particular with our acquisition of Qualtrics last year. We're really starting to see how to enable those capabilities to our customers. But what are we actually doing with Qualtrics, and how's it going to help our customers in the future?
Oh, that's a fantastic topic, because this is one of my meetings over the next 2 days as well. We actually embedded Qualtrics last year in our Ariba guided buying, where we did some first simple surveys about the customer experience and our catalog management, etc., just to gather internal customer feedback, which worked fantastically well. And we're going to get the right insights out of that one. And out of it, we can improve our value proposition towards our customers. And for this year, we're starting to embed Qualtrics for suppliers, which we're doing want to do in 2 ways, both on Ariba as well as on Fieldglass. Using it as a bit of a performance management tool, to getting an evaluation and of our suppliers from our internal customers, but also even more important, getting the voice of our suppliers, how we perform as a company, where we are good at it, where we are not so good at it, how can we improve in common projects, how can we further become more simple in our administrative onboarding in the P2P process, but even more important, how we can further collaborate better and even innovate better. And this is an exciting project we are kicking off, actually, as I said, over the next 2 days, and I'm really looking forward to that one to onboard Qualtrics for suppliers here.
Sounds like some great innovation, Nick. And I'll tell you, for my first conversation for 2021, I had a fantastic conversation with you. I want to thank you for sharing your story about your background, how you got started, and really how SAP is, really eating their own medicine, kind of what I said earlier, practicing what you preach, SAP using SAP. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really happy to have this conversation and really enjoyed the time.
Super. Thank you very much, Etch. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.